performing my ritual of saying I remembered to do it this time. I haven't forgotten yet, which I'm very proud of.
I
But
can imagine that being a persistent fear, though. I could
it is.
absolutely.
Well, this was my first time doing anything like this, so I've really just been kind of learning as we go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And mostly I just feel bad because sometimes these can go for I've had a couple go for a few hours, and uh, I would hate to go through all of that have somebody else go through all of that rather, and then be like, sorry.
Yeah, we have to do it again. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and like I'm really neurotic about audio or other art stuff that I'm working on. It's automatically backed up, so I've had to make sure I'm still doing all that. And yeah. All right. So welcome to episode of whatever it is, whatever order these end up being in. I'm here with John Langan, who was kind enough to I wrote him years ago. Well, so in a very short period of time, I ran across the Masque references to the Masque of the Red Death in like two or three different books all at once. And it's like, wow. And his was the final one in his short story. And I thought, well, that's really interesting because I've never been that big of a Poe fan other than appreciating what he does. So I went and I read it and I got really I've always been very interested in the idea of island culture and where you have these very closed communities. And I also,
Mm.
as I have mentioned in many of these so far, I tend to like anything that's really excessive and over the top. And the idea of that level of kind of inbreeding, you know, so at least conceptual inbreeding anyway, got me very interested. So I ended up doing this illustrated version of the book, and John was kind enough to write the foreword for it, and it's very involved breakdown of the original story. So yeah, this is John Langan, and you're a nominee, or no, you're an award winner for The Fisherman, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I won the Bram Stoker Award and the This Is Horror Award for the Fisherman,
That's
and
awesome.
I won the This Is Horror Award for a couple of my story collections. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, I'm very happy to. Congratulations on the Stoker thing. We have been nominated a handful of times, and so we have our certificates and we have a little punch card that's like if you get 12 of them, I think you're in
Yeah.
so they say. Um, so I'll begin this as I always do. What was when you were a kid? Like, what was the first thing you remember being really passionate about that was that really like held you for more than a couple of weeks? Because time for kids is
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah. Art. I would say drawing.
oh, yeah, yeah.
I absolutely loved to draw when I was a kid. Um, I I'll be honest, I can't remember if my love for drawing predated my love for comics or vice versa. I kind of feel like it did a little bit, but I'm not 100% sure.
Mm.
So yeah, when I was a kid, I just absolutely loved to draw. And I can vaguely remember, just at the very edge of my memory, I can remember being able to write or draw or whatever with both hands. And then at a certain point, I settled on my left hand, and all through grades. I mean, preschool through eighth grade, so about age 13. That was my biggest ambition, was to be some type of artist. I thought I would work in comic books, and I grew up reading things, all the Marvel comics of this would have been the 1970s into the very early 80s, and was just the hugest fan of Spider-Man in particular, but the Fantastic Four, and then that was also the maybe one of the first. How would you put it? Eras of Tolkien. I mean, there have been eras of Tolkien before this, obviously, but this was when the Bakshi Lord of the Rings came out, and also the Rankin Bass Hobbit, and then slightly later Return of the King. So that Tolkien was suddenly all over the media in ways that were more apparent to a kid. And so I was reading Tolkien, and I was reading all the books that were then maybe republished or given new packaging because of the success of the Lord of the Rings. So Lloyd Alexander's Chronicles of Prydain, and of course Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia, Le Guin, the Wizard of Earthsea. And because I've been reading the Conan comic books, I also started to get into the Robert E. Howard and Lynn Sprague, no, L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. Um, so a lot of my passion at that particular point in my life was really for fantastical storytelling, I guess you would say, primarily through drawing. I couldn't. I did write a little bit, but I didn't really have the same kind of inspiration or I didn't feel the same type of inspiration that I felt when I was drawing. There were moments where I wrote things that were very, for me, very successful. But when I left, when I graduated 8th grade and I was going into high school, I was really hoping that I would take art classes and that was ultimately where things would lead, was to some type of career working for Marvel or DC or one of them. When I got to high school, my high school had no art program. So that kind of tanked that. But at the same time, I discovered Stephen King's work, and that kind of galvanized me and took all of that kind of creative energy and channeled it into this new kind of direction. But I still love comics. I don't read them nearly as thoroughly or across the range as I used to, because not only are there just too many of them, but also they're too expensive.
Right.
So I tend to catch up on things nowadays when they're published as sort of trade paperback compendiums. Yeah. So there were certain writers like Cullen Bunn and James Tinian IV, to name two, Scott Snyder, who I think have done marvelous kind of horror-related work. And usually when I see their names attached to something, I say to myself, "Oh, okay, this is going to be worth picking up." And I still fantasize at some point about getting into writing or working in comics, but I haven't been a serious artist, I guess you would say, since I was like 13. I still doodle, and sometimes if I find myself stuck in a story, I'll sometimes just doodle, and I'll try to figure, just to sort of draw whatever it is, and sometimes that's helpful at engaging that other part of things. But yeah, no, it was art, drawing. That was such a passion for me, and I just did it, kind of compulsively or whatever. I would just sit at my desk and just do these big drawings. And I had this wonderful art teacher, and she was very, very supportive, all from grades 1 through 8. She was really, really supportive of anybody who was interested in art. And so I would do whatever, my superhero drawings, and she would put them up in the back of the classroom. And I took a painting class with her. Actually, I think 2 painting classes over the course of 2 summers, which didn't go as probably as far as they might have, because it was oil painting, and I didn't. Oil paint was expensive, so I didn't have like 3 or 4 tubes of it, And also, I think I didn't understand oil painting in a way that I might now. If I were to try it, I probably would have been better taking drawing classes or something. But that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, these things happen. Yeah, oil paint because it has the word paint in it, people think it's going to be comparable to, and you really have to kind of look at them as different things.
Yeah.
That's cool. So how did you get from there to writing? Like at what point did that shift?
It was this remarkable experience of I was interested. I knew who Stephen King was. I was sort of aware of him. There was a girl I went to high school with who I went to grade school with, who was a big Stephen King fan. She was reading Stephen King all throughout 8th grade. And so I read Cujo the summer after 8th grade, and it didn't do much for me. And but in the fall, for some reason, Christine was released in paperback, and I just said, I'm going to read this. And it was just this incredible experience that in a lot of ways I've spent like a lot of the rest of my life when I, from kind of literary critical perspective, if you will, trying to understand, that it just galvanized me. It just was one of those Saul on the road to Damascus things,
Right, yeah,
where I was just utterly, everything was just put together at this one moment. Everything, kind of made sense. And so I after that, that was it.
yeah.
And yeah, I just thought this is what I have to do. And I just turned kind of right around and started reading. I'd already been a decent reader, and certainly I'd read a ton of comic books. So I was a better reader than I think I thought I was, and necessarily my parents thought I was, because they just saw me reading comics and they were like, "Oh, that's not literature." And but I began just to tear my way through King's work, and then to find other writers that he recommended, like Peter Straub, say, who became very important to me, or Shirley Jackson or Richard Matheson. And so all of that just kind of flowed out there. And then in the meantime, I was fortunate enough to have some high school classes where the teacher taught something like Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles. And reading that led me into some of Bradbury's other stuff, The October Country or Fahrenheit 451, some of his short stories. And a little bit later on, I had to read things like Jane Eyre, which I was really surprised to discover I just absolutely loved. In part, I guess, because it's a kind of it's a gothic novel with sort of horror overtones.
I have to
And
say, I've never read it, so I can't. But that's actually pretty interesting. I'll have to.
Yeah, it was, well, and it's very, it has this, for a book that's going on 200 years old. It has this remarkably engaging voice. You always you feel as if this narrator is just talking to you. You're just having a conversation with her, and she's like, "Yeah, let me tell you," and then on you go.
Right.
So my my literary horizons, I guess you would say, sort of expanded steadily. I became a bit more self-conscious about writing horror as I got to the end of high school, and then got into college, because I was like, "Oh, is this respectable enough?" And I was when I was younger, I was really worried about that, about being respectable. And as I got older, it was interesting. I continued to read horror. I wrote the occasional story that was an out-and-out horror story. I wrote a lot of stories that were thematically or tonally horror stories, even if on the surface they didn't seem to be horror stories. And then in my late 20s, when my wife and I got together, she was doing work actually on Jack Kerouac, on a novel by Kerouac called Dr. Sax, in which Kerouac takes the figure of the pulp figure of the Shadow, and sort of uses him, turns him into this character named Dr. Sax. And so, we were talking, and she said, Kerouac thought that like popular culture was, a perfect vehicle, a perfectly adequate vehicle for like serious expression. And that just kind of turned the key. And it kind of let me find my way back into writing horror. And that was, geez, that was like 26 years ago. So I kind of haven't looked back since that time.
Can you hold on like 2 minutes? I'll be right back.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Okay. I've been coming to terms with the aging and the glasses thing, and I've always worn glasses, but
Yeah.
I went in to get my eyes adjusted, and I've realized I have this weird focal point from like here to about here, that if I have my contacts in, I can't see it. If I put my
Yep.
glasses on, or if I take my glasses off, I can't see it. So it's a lot of me kind of doing this.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, sorry about that. Donna said something, and I just couldn't concentrate because she was trying to figure something out. Um,
No problem.
right. So let me try and get back on track. It's awesome doing this because so many people have been in the same kind of age range. And I've been starting with the same question, and it's been pretty much across the board the same answer, which has been very cool. Like, I think it's interesting for me because I'm not a comic guy. Like, I
Hmm.
like them, and I became aware of them kind of 87, 88 when I could see them as art.
Sure.
When like Sienkiewicz did Elektra and
Hmm.
Dark Knight
You
Returns.
And you would have had Moore starting the Watchmen roughly around that time, I think,
Yep.
maybe a little
Yeah,
later.
that People Vendetta,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it was, and also again with the smaller, because of my ADD and things like that, like going and get something every month is just not gonna, it's like
right,
I just want to sit down and read the thing.
right.
But it's cool that you remember that Return of the King, because I was talking to somebody else earlier or the other day, and uh, he was aware of the Hobbit version, which was a really huge influence on, but he had no idea the guy went and did Return of the King because Bakshi wasn't able to do that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, what's fascinating to me, just as an aside about the Rankin Bass versions, is that, and it's what Bakshi misses, I think, is that the Rankin Bass versions get the music. Like Tolkien has songs all
Mhm.
throughout his books, and it's the same. Peter Jackson kind of leaves that out as well. These are people who are constantly singing to each other. They have old songs, new songs. They have songs that are specific to certain situations. They have all different registers of these very sort of serious ancient songs and these kind of funny songs as well. And I thought that the Rankin Bass got those in ways that in ways that I don't think actually any of the other Tolkien adaptations have.
Yeah, I think that that's very true. And one of the things I've been interested in is there's got to be a word for it, but essentially sonic foundations. As a
Mm-hmm.
musician, I look at other musicians, like for instance, the sound effects in Star Wars.
Yeah,
The radios talk to each other, or the lightsaber sound, just all that. Those are so completely deeply ingrained. Whereas
yeah,
I have
yeah,
friends that are also doing industrial stuff who are just a little bit younger, and for them, their language is Terminator, Aliens, those
mm-hmm.
sonic sounds. And I think again, going back a little bit, people our age, things that are in the area of the Misty Mountains, like are immediately just going to go right in there and wrap
Yeah,
around the spine and just be like, yo, this is something that speaks to me,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
which I think is very interesting. I And you have a lot of like Lovecraft stuff, which is I think another kind of one of those common languages within this age group. I really, really, I this is one of the few times I've actually had a chance to say this to somebody. I really, really enjoyed The Wide Carnivorous Sky.
Well,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, well, obviously to the point that I name dropped it in a song. Um, and For the appeal to all of that for me has always been there's nothing you can do. That's it. Like you did the story with the crab in it too.
Yep, yep,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah, and it was a similar sort of vibe, which is interesting because I ran across that in that Cthulhu Mythos double book series that came out at one,
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which is another one of those things I would love to see explored more. Is this after the old ones come? But this isn't about me. So what is it that hooks you with all of that? Where is it? I guess that you find the knife edge that keeps you going. That this is getting.
Well, I think like okay, so like in terms of the Lovecraft stuff, for example, right? I I kind of discovered Lovecraft through other writers first.
Mhm.
So I want to say King, because King is hugely influenced by Lovecraft. But even when I was reading Robert E. Howard as a kid, Howard and Lovecraft are buddies, and they're exchanging ideas and so on through the mail. So I kind of came to some of Lovecraft's general ideas, through Howard's take on them. And Howard's take on them was often very different, obviously, from Lovecraft's. In Lovecraft's, it's there's this huge monstrous thing, and we lose our sanity looking at it, and we escape with our lives if we're, I guess, if we're lucky. Whereas for Howard, it was, these things appear and they're horrifying and they're threatening, but they've appeared within our kind of space time, and that means that if you have a sword and a strong arm, you can deal with them. And it wasn't. I think like it was interesting, right? Because when I was reading King, and then King was turning me on to all these other writers, and I'm reading them, and Lovecraft keeps popping up in people's sometimes in their stories. They make reference to him. sometimes just in story notes or an introduction or something. So Lovecraft and his work lurks behind all of this stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, I have to check this guy out. And the first book I got was Del Rey had done a series of editions of Lovecraft stuff with a Michael Whalen painting, this kind of wraparound painting that they chopped up into little pieces for the smaller books. And so it was Lovecraft's Dreamland stories, The Dream Quest of Unknown Cat, and so on, which when I got older, I really loved because they're just so weird and they're just so much their own thing. But they're the farthest thing away possible from, say, Stephen King or whatever. And I just was like, oh, I don't know. And so I know a lot of other horror writers, especially ones who are a generation older than me, will talk about that experience of reading Lovecraft when they were 12 or 13 or something like that, and just being, as happened to me with King, just being transformed by it. But for me, reading Lovecraft at probably like 14 or 15 just left me kind of cold. Right. And when I got a little bit older, into my early 20s, then I sat down and I read him with much more sort of concentration, and have returned to him actually a lot since then, but in a different kind of way, I feel like, than someone like King or Ramsey Campbell, for whom I think Lovecraft is encoded in their sort of writerly DNA right from the get-go. I feel like Lovecraft is someone, relatively speaking, that I came to later in my creative life. And I think possibly that, I don't know to what extent that helps me as a writer, because I don't have quite the same deep emotional tie to him that I do to King, say. I can read King's stuff just endlessly, and still, on some level, even if I'm thinking, Steve, maybe you've written better books, but nonetheless, there's some kind of deep itch that it scratches. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Lovecraft, I can look at things a little bit, clinically is not the right word, critically might be a better word, and then say, oh, well, what if we took this out? What if we played with this? One of the things I guess I've found, not intentionally, was, but in like looking over my own stories, was that quite often when I am like, oh, I accept an invitation to a Lovecraftian anthology or something, and I'm like, okay, I've got to do some kind of Lovecraft thing, that the human element of the story becomes much more boiled down, or not boiled down, but down to earth, I guess, like to the point almost of the mundane, of the pedestrian. And so you've got this juxtaposition then between whatever is going on, whatever big monster is lumbering around, and some guy, trying to tend his garden. Right. And I think it would be fun potentially to write like Godzilla versus Cthulhu sort of thing, but it seems that my response to Lovecraft is it sort of pushes me in the opposite direction almost, which is not to disavow the cosmic things, but they become like background almost to whatever's going on in the foreground.
Well, yeah, and I think that's something I was actually talking about recently or yesterday with just the real world. You've got the inevitability of death, and you can either let that destroy you, or you kind of go, yes, well, that's a thing, and you go and do, and so I think that is very much there. We're always just the little guys doing our little thing, our little bag of salt water running around on a cracker, So like, yeah, I mean, I think that is a very real thing, and almost, I don't know, more contemporary, I think, than, as much as I love Legati, like, here's a whole bunch of very specific circumstances that are wound up with this one character isolated in this town with a whole bunch of weird people who do weird shit.
Right.
And so it's when the weird and the incomprehensible even does impact daily life. That I think that's why when I get into that knife edge, that's where the weird, interesting stuff for me happens.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like, with certain of Lovecraft stories, like say The Shadow over Innsmouth, this is a guy trying to find out who he is, like this is he and what he finds out is he's a monster at the end, but he accepts that.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that's fascinating about that ending is it seems pretty clear that Lovecraft meant you to be horrified by that. He meant you to be like, oh my God, that's the true horror, is like being a monster and being happy with it. But that, for us, that cuts in this different direction. Like, oh, maybe you could be happy and be a monster, So I think and it is, I think one of Lovecraft's saving graces, whatever his other faults may be, is that his stories so often do root themselves in the here and now.
Mm-hmm.
I think with Legati, you've got something else. And I remember when Songs of a Dead Dreamer was published in mass market paperback by Carolyn Graff in the early 90s. And that was like this big deal, like, holy cow, because we'd all been hearing about Thomas Legati and we'd read a couple of his stories here and there. And then, here was just this long, and not even long, really. But this dense collection of stories, that just. Go ahead.
I agree. Like like even a short story is incredibly dense is the exact right word for it. It's like a really black chocolate cake, even if the tiniest little piece, and you're like, okay, that was good.
Yeah. And I think that, people have pointed out that, like, at a sentence by sentence level, Legati is not a difficult writer to read. You can take any of his sentences out and you read it and think, oh, okay. But the effect of those sentences layered together is often, and I think combined with the fact that Legati likes to leave things out. He likes to hint at things. He likes to bring you to a point where you realize, those little pills that character ate weren't pills. They were little cocoons and something is hatching inside him. I think because of that, Legati's work has a very different feel and effect, and I think even concerns than Lovecraft's does. I think that they get, because they're very peculiar stylists with this very peculiar particular worldview. I think they get lumped together a lot, but I don't know that they necessarily should any more, than any two writers should be lumped together.
I think like Legati and then like Lade Baron's stuff, it all kind of is kind of this new. I don't know. It's all feels very, very self-contained, and you're absolutely right. And I don't think I had thought about this as I was reading it, so I would never have been able to articulate it. But yours does feel much more attached to the rest of the world. Like you've got the guy in his house with the crab and Clue's over there, but there is a sense of a larger place and a larger experience within that, as opposed to, again, almost like just the how isolated so much of
I think with say I think with like with Legati, I think what you find is quite often characters and maybe they're just isolated inside their heads, but so often there's something about their existence that kind of leads them to this point of a kind of an isolation or a kind of a confinement, maybe in a kind of a shadowy, kind of horrifying kind of space. I think with Laird, there's something. I mean, Laird is interesting in part because his work is very much grounded in the places that he's lived, whether it's Alaska or the Pacific Northwest or more recently the Hudson Valley. But yeah, there's also this sense that it intersects this kind of cosmic reality or cosmic experience, which is deeply frightening and it takes Lovecraft's sort of disinterest and these vast creatures that are kind of disinterested in you, except maybe for a snack. Mm-hmm. And it takes that, it sort of turns that up, and it says, actually, they're really interested in you as a snack. That one of the things that might happen if you don't transcend all the way into some kind of cosmic brain thing that just floats out into the cosmos. If you stop right before there, you might become very interested in how tasty human beings are. And so there's this absolute sense of a cosmos that is predatory, not just, I would say, beyond hostile, but is
Actively.
really actively out to get you. You know, that in the same way that if we were all little ants just kind of doing our thing, we would be terrified of spiders, and we would be terrified of assassin bugs and so on, because the world for an ant is full of all these things that are out to get you. And they don't, I don't know that a spider hates an ant, you know, but a spider looks at an ant as tasty.
Sure,
And I
yeah.
think there's some kind of analog there that I have to work out a little bit more, but I think that's my general sense.
Mhm. Have you two have you read? One of them is Coldest War, Charles Stross.
A little bit, a little bit. I don't. I've read some of the stories.
He has actually one specific story just called The Coldest War, and it is,
Okay.
for me, one of the absolute best modern mythos stories ever written. And basically, humans have lost. We've got a place on the moon that we're all going to go to, but at some point during the Cold War, they figured out how to weaponize Shoggoths and all of these other
Uh-huh.
things. So all of
Uh-huh.
it's kind of almost in the same way that like the Illuminatus books are, like where it's like, yes, we are accepting that these are real things, and this is how humans are kind of abusing them.
Right. Right. Right.
But yeah, I can't. One of my absolute favorites, because there is an absolute sense of dread of the horror of, like, yes, they may have seemed like a really good idea at the time, but now all of the horror is really coming home to roost.
Right. 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 Right.
And the second one is one of my absolute favorite books, and a guy who's turned into a good friend, and I'm interviewing him in a couple of days. This guy Peter Watts, who wrote
Yeah. 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 His stuff is he did. Oh man, he's got the, what is the novel called about the
Blindside.
vampire kind of.
Blindside. Yep.
Yeah. 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 And then also the story about the things.
Yes.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up is because, and this is kind of a spoiler alert, sort of, but not really. Uh, the aliens in Blindsight become aware of humans because they're getting our transmissions, and they can't make
Yeah.
any sense of them. And they're just like, okay, the only reason you would put nonsense like that out into the universe is to diminish our resources. Therefore, it's an attack.
Uh-huh.
You know, that, so that's another one of those things I find just absolutely fascinating. You know, and it's neat to see more of that taken into account. And whereas the monsters aren't just human motivated, you know, like the gods of Greece or whatever, like just turned up, but they're
Right.
actually like accounting for the fact that they have no, we can't even begin to question or understand because they're alien. They're, you know, so that's, you know, I think another cool way that that depth of horror comes in because of that. And he even gets into your body turning against itself, which is for your brain. But yeah, I have I have been a huge fan of Stephen King ever since I was a kid, and it's been neat watching his trajectory. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
as you know, he can still do all of that stuff, but the level of maturity that is gone, you know, Lisey's story in particular, I
Hmm.
thought was incredible. And I imagine, like, you've read it, so from an art person, somebody who writes, or an artist's point of view, and you think about that legacy and how the things that you make are going to continue on. And I don't know, I just thought that was a really cool way of talking about that. You know what I mean? Like, it's not something you think to hear about or think to talk about. So what is it that is something that you are looking at and kind of going, that's something I want to tap into. That's a place I want to go with my own work.
Oh man. Well, I mean, in some ways, I feel like all of it. You know, I when I was a kid and I started publishing, I was very worried that I would run out of ideas or I would run out of stories. You know, and I would I would read people saying, "Oh, if I live to 100, I'll never write all the stories I have." And I would think, how do you do that? Who, and I mean, I do think that for writing, and I think probably for every art form, like I'm fond of saying that the secret to writing is writing, that the more you write, the more you discover you can write and you want to write, and so on. And I imagine it's the same with every art, but I'm not sure. There
Oh
may
yeah.
be.
I have a little post-it note that sits right here that says you're dying. And that's one of the reasons I do as much as I can, like, because I can't imagine a point ever where I'll just be like, well, that's it. I'm out of ideas.
Yeah, yeah, and I know that some people like. I know that happens for some people. They kind of feel that they reach an endpoint, and hey, that's the writer John Fowles. A few years before he died, had a stroke, and after that stroke, he just felt that it had turned off something in his brain, and he was like, okay. So I understand that does happen, but for the moment, it feels like there's plenty that I want to continue writing. Every time, not every time, but a lot of times that I'll be watching something or see something or read something, and I'll think, oh, I could do something like that, or there'll be some little idea. People will invite me to anthologies, and I would say at this point, it's almost like the more absurd the premise, the better,
Mhm.
because it becomes like this kind of challenge.
Yeah,
How
yeah,
can you
exactly.
how can you do this? And I was invited. I was invited to an anthology, and the premise was, superheroes versus Cthulhu, as it were. And I that idea really like led in really interesting directions. And then the other day, I was like, I should really see when the deadline for that is. And it was like
Right.
last June, and I was like,
Um,
oh well. But I'll get to that story though. So um, I on I think it goes. I think the sources of inspiration go in like a lot of different directions. So like on the one hand, I was invited to contribute a story to an anthology inspired by the music of Neutral Milk Hotel. And I'd listened to a little of Neutral Milk Hotel, but not a huge amount. And I was like, yes, absolutely, I'll do that, because I don't know how to do that, and I want to try to figure out how to do that. Um, more recently, I was invited to contribute to an anthology of songs inspired by Black Sabbath songs, or stories inspired by Black Sabbath songs. And again, I was like, yeah, I'll see what I can come up with, because I have no idea how I would do that. And so so part of I think how I keep moving ahead is to be given these things that I don't know how I'm going to do,
mhm.
and then to try to work out, like in doing them, try to work that out. I think at the same time, part of what I'm interested in is things that I'm interested in, things that I don't like. So like I've never been, until recent years, I've never been a huge serial killer fan or slasher fan, And then but I'm good friends with Stephen Graham Jones, so it's like a heresy to say that. And and so more recently, seeing what Stephen's been doing and what other writers have been doing in response to him, I thought, man, I gotta, how can I do that? How do I figure that out? How do I make a serial killer thing work? And I may never, but the effort to do so is something that helps me to grow creatively. The other day, I was riding in the car with my daughter, and we were talking about exorcism movies and recent ones and so on. And I was saying, it's like, and I wondered out loud, is it did the Exorcist, the original Exorcist, just do everything you can do with an exorcism form, or how would you do that?
Mhm.
And so that's floating around. I don't know where it's going to lead, but that's floating around as well. So I think some of it, yeah, is just asking yourself, how would I do this thing? And sometimes too, something seems to just drop in your lap. It's I feel like some of it is just being receptive. Somebody tells you a crazy story, and you're like, oh, I got to file off the serial numbers, and I'm going to use that one because that's just nuts. That was I can't believe that happened, and I may add, say, oh, there'll be a vampire too or something like that. But I
Well, it
find
fills
too
itself
is
out as it tells you its story. It starts to kind of
Yeah,
So,
no, absolutely, absolutely. When I was a kid, I was driving with my girlfriend at the time, middle of late at night on the interstate, and we hit some kind of animal. It could have been a dog, it could have been a coyote. I'm not sure, but one it just sort of appeared like right out of the darkness. Bang! We went over it. I pulled over. I ran back to see. I mean, it was obviously dead or going to be dead, but there was like a just a massive traffic behind us, and so by the time I could sort of see, the thing had just been like disintegrated.
right.
And a couple of months later, I wrote a short story about it, submitted it. Never really went anywhere. And then I came back to that story many years. I mean, just the last couple of years, and I was like, oh, wait a minute.
Mhm.
And it expanded, it grew. And then having written that story, I had an invitation for another anthology, and I was like, wait, there's a story that goes before this story. And so that, the prequel, as it were. And now, based on where I left things at the end, I'm like, well, you could just do the hat trick. You could try to write like, well, what happens next?
Mhm.
Whether I will or not, I'm not 100% sure, but I've become much more open to the idea of picking up things from earlier stories and like some little detail and carrying it forward. So I just finished a long story, uh, which picked up a little detail from another long story, and I was like, hang on a second. And so whereas I think if you talk about either Lovecraft or Laird, um, they were doing that pretty early on. They had kind of recognized, and realized that there was something to be said for creating that kind of from the get go. But that's been something that I've just kind of come to over the last few years in more than a surface level. If you can find connections among a lot of the things that I've written,
Sure, sure.
but they're not always. It's more just, oh, this takes place in this same town, or I mention a character in passing. But in the last few years, I've been like, oh wait, I want to use that character again, or oh,
Mhm.
I want to make that character. I want to bring them forward now and make them the protagonists. So that's another way. I think that it's. I almost think that it's. I don't know. I think it's indefinite. Maybe it's not infinite, but it's indefinite. The number of ways that you can kind of keep going if you just allow yourself to remain open and just say,
Mhm.
let's try this. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. There's a great quote from Gaiman, and it's basically all it is saying "what if," and that's kind of for me with everything that I do. It's always just, well, what if? Let's see what happens. I like worst case scenario, you end up with some stuff that you don't know what to do with it, so you put it in a corner, and then you can come back to it in our time
Yeah,
when.
absolutely, absolutely. You come back to it like that has happened to me so often where I start writing something, I'm like, oh, okay, and then I'm like, I don't know what comes next. And yeah, when I was a kid, I would crumple it up and throw it away,
Right.
and now I'm like, no, just leave it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then if
No, it's great having that little like it's like your own library of that you can just draw from.
yeah, you can just say, oh, what about, oh, let's do something with this. I'll try to. I wrote an article um, for there was I don't remember, it was the HWA put together an anthology, and the nonfiction anthology, and maybe it's someone. Anyway, the idea was like writing prompts, and I was just like, hey, here are the titles of, I don't know, 50 or 60 different anthologies that either I was never invited to or I couldn't make the deadline for. And it's not a knock on these anthologies, but this is inspiration. This is, many years ago, a friend of mine did an anthology of like weird Wizard of Oz tales, which is perhaps redundant. And I was like, oh man, and I still have thought, well, what would I do if I were? I still don't have the answer to that question, but it's still like turning over in my head. So I think that you can also look at things like sometimes you miss an opportunity, you
Mhm.
don't find out about something until it's too late. Yeah, that's frustrating, but write it down. Write write just the, oh, I could have been invited to the Nosferatu tribute anthology.
Right.
Okay, what would I do? And then write that story.
One of the things that I kind of enjoy doing as an exercise is I will, I'll hear about something some band is doing. Like there's this band or the guy who operates in the name Author and Punisher, and he has built this whole crazy like actually kind of like the thing back there, except it's portable and the way he plays is totally unintuitive. But he's doing essentially death metal
Uh-huh.
with electronics. He's an engineer, so he's built like shifts that control like the guitars and things like that.
Right.
And I would hear about his stuff, but I hadn't actually heard any of it. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. I'm going to write an album based on what I think his stuff sounds like.
Sounds like, yeah, 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 yeah.
And so, I think that that's always a fun kind of way to tap into these things without like directly kind of going, like, so King is famous for not working to plot. Like he just starts. Um, is that how you work as well, or do you have a general over? Because that, I've always wanted to be more of a writer. I've managed to get my a couple of books out, my graphic novel and stuff. But the thing that always held me down was if I didn't know how it was going to end, it would sit there in the back of my head and feel like there was just this leak with all
Right, right.
coming out of it. I didn't know where it was going to go, so it felt very difficult to commit to it. So, do you know how the arc is going to work vaguely when you?
At a certain point, I would say, like a lot of times, I'll just be like, okay, I'm going to write this story about whatever it is, and what I really need to get started is sort of the voice of the story. Like
Mhm,
I need to hear the way the story is going to be written. And that may be a character's voice speaking. It may be the narrative voice, so third person narrative, whatever. But and then once I kind of have the voice of the story, then I can get going. And the voice usually brings with it, it seems, like some early stuff about the story. And and there's enough structure there for me to trust that okay, this is going to go somewhere.
mhm,
As we said, once in a while it doesn't. Once in a while you just reach this point where you're like, oh, I don't know what's next. But a lot of times what happens is as I'm writing, it'll suddenly occur to me, oh, hang on a second, this is what's going to happen. This is where it's going to go. And then I'll write towards that ending.
mhm,
And sometimes when I reach the ending, like when I wrote my first novel, which is called House of Windows, I knew fairly early on in that process where I was going.
mhm.
But when I got to that point, I was like, no. I was like, I still included it, but I was like, this is too pat. This is too Twilight Zone,
Right.
like in a bad way. This would work if I was writing maybe even a novella, but for a novel of this length, this can't be it. And so I wound up writing basically three endings. It's like maybe this happens, maybe this happens, maybe this happens, because in the moment I realized that everything else I had written since first having that idea demanded that I do more,
Mhm.
that I expand more. So I think that I think that that's sort of I guess how it tends to operate. I don't usually have I don't usually have a specific idea of the ending. It there are times where if I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to write it for an anthology of stories about killer angels. Well, what do angels look like, and what do they do, and how what would be how have angels been used traditionally, and where are you going to go with them that's a little bit different. And
Mhm.
I think when I think about that kind of stuff, or when I plan that kind of stuff, or like make notes or free write or draw or whatever, there's probably in that case more of a sense of, oh, all right, well, this is I think about where I'm going to have to wind up. But even then, that may change depending on how the story goes.
Mhm. Yeah, I am a process junkie. I was very
Mm-hmm.
fortunate in the school that I went to, Corcoran in DC, um, was very, very much focused on don't just lock this idea into your head and
Yeah, yeah.
like feel like and hear all of these different ways to discover and to communicate with the thing that you're working on. Um, I have always my space KK explanation that I use is that everything already exists out there in this platonic ideal.
Yeah, yeah.
Your job is to just bring it through without fucking it up. And like you can have these conversations with it, and that's cool, and you make suggestions, and it might go, yeah, let's try it. But the more that you like inflict your own will on it, the closer it gets to vanity, and then it starts to just fall apart.
Yeah, I feel like the way that I think about my writing is that I'm kind of creating a like a place or a space for a reader to come and have a kind of interaction. And
Mhm.
I think about it as if um, you know, we have like these like not like Lego facing Legos, right? Except that they're irregular. And so there are places when we come together, it's rare that we're ever going to fit perfectly.
Mhm.
Sometimes we'll fit better or worse, or we'll fit in ways that I didn't even foresee.
And
And
you,
so I try to leave that open, you know, like to allow. I have friends and you know I'll read about other writers who try to very much control the reader's experience, and I certainly have aspects of that myself. You know, there have been times people have said, "Did you intend this?" And I'm like, "No, absolutely not." But by and large, I really want to allow the reader to say, "Oh, did you think X, Y, or Z?" And then I can say, you know, usually I'm like, yes, yes, you're very smart to have noticed that. When in reality, I'm thinking, oh my God, that's amazing. That's crazy. How did that, you know?
yeah, that's what I always say to people. It's like that would never have occurred to me, and that's fucking brilliant. Because to me,
Mm-hmm.
like that to me means that I did my job. You know, my
Yes.
job is to like here's a road. You can go anywhere on this road. All I'm doing is defining the edges of it and
Yeah.
putting some stuff. LSD, Skinny Puppy, and Umberto Eco keyed me into that at a really
Mm-hmm.
when I was like 18 or 19, and that was such a useful thing to realize. It's like you can put all the stuff out in front of people, and your brains are connection machines, so they're going to figure out exactly what
Yeah. 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 No,
something.
exactly. Exactly. I like to, a lot of times I'll include stuff in stories and I'll just have this intuitive sense. This should be in here. I'm like, okay. And at this point, I trust that. And um, when I was first starting and I was writing more slowly, I would work those things a bit more, a bit harder. But honestly, even then, there were still plenty of times where people would say to me, "Well, obviously, you included this because of that," and I would think,
Right.
"No, but that's awesome." So I just thought, you know, my kind of creativity is smarter than I am,
Well,
and let me just trust it. Yeah,
I've been thinking a lot lately about collective subconscious and how there are all these ideas out there, and we kind of just particularly now with social media, we're kind of interacting with like the average of all of these ideas. And you might see it pass by in a thread and not really think about it, but it gets in there. And so I think that, maybe when you include those little, you know, here's a thing, I don't know why, but that's the thing that needs to be there.
yeah,
Um, that could very well be why it's something that goes out and really resonates because for them, they have also had the thing pass on their feed. Maybe that just made that connection
yeah,
for them.
yeah. No, I think I think that it's one of the, you know, one of the things that happens to us, right, when we participate in art, um, as I hate to use the word consumer, right, but when we're in the opposite end of that exchange, right, where we're listening to something or watching something or reading something or whatever, is that the reaction that we have with it, um, in a sense, flows back into the work and the way that we understand the work and what the work means to us and
Mhm.
so on. But it also has a possibility of flowing outwards, you know, into us in the sense of inspiring our own art then and
Mhm.
inspiring us to say, oh, well, you know, what if, um, you know, it's like my favorite funny example of this is that the writer Kelly Link has said that when she's watching a TV show, especially if it's getting a little bit boring, she tries to figure out which character is the vampire, and then she's like sort of creating this whole story for herself where, yes, it's 30 Rock, but in fact, you know, this
Really?
character
I
is
love that.
the, you know, Tracy Morgan is the vampire, you know,
Oh,
and so I look at that as that's the kind of thing that you can also do, is there's um, I I love the idea of the kind of collective unconscious.
Mhm.
But there's, and it's funny because I mean I really like a lot of Jung's ideas. It's just that there's a cynical part of me that is like, nah, Freud's probably right. It's all sex and death.
Well, I mean, I think
But I,
it's all part. I think both can be true. I mean, like,
yeah,
yeah, it's hard. Like, I ended up in the interview the other night about nihilism, and I was like, yes, I recognize that that's all very accurate and very true, but it doesn't change the fact that we still have to live. So there are
yeah,
all other
yeah.
systems that we can have. So yes, it may very well just be sex and death, but we're still here and we still have to interact. And by doing that, I think it does create that social architecture that
Yeah.
allows for that.
Well, I think too that the idea of the sort of spiritus mundi, or the collective unconscious, right? It does suggest that there were things that might outlive us, and
Mhm.
that we might be among them. We might outlive us, and that's a seductive thought. But yeah, I think one of the things that you also see in a more kind of general, or I don't want to say generic sense, but maybe general sense, is you do see that ideas, they migrate, they flow, they and some of that undoubtedly is through reading and writing, or whatever. You hear something in a you see something, you read something, a previous work of art, and it speaks to you, and it makes its way into your art, and then possibly into other people's art. But there's something, and I don't want to be too mystical about it, but it's hard not to be, at least a little bit. It's hard not to notice that certain kinds of metaphors or whatever, or symbols, just kind of make their way, and you get into archetypes, right? And you get into the idea that, well, no, these things are actually part of our experience to such a degree that we almost have no choice but to follow them as they or to allow them into what we're doing, I guess is might be a better way to put it.
I love they're fantastic tools. One of my exercises that I've given to people for figuring out creative. I think I'm so used to just kind of going, hey, how about this and how about this, and let's smash them together and see what happens. Just because it's what I've done for so long. But when I work with younger artists and they're trying to figure out, there's a poster or a graphic that's floating around, and it's 101 characters for an epic story. And,
Mm,
there's the jester and the this and the that and the twins and whatnot. And I'm always just like, so just pick three of them and mentally put them in a room and just, give them something, have them start mocking one, whatever.
right.
Because we have those senses and those archetypes, it's easy to just immediately pin these characteristics onto them.
I think too that what can be interesting as well with those kinds of situations is to put those characters in the room, and then you say, okay, and also in the room there is a rose, and
Yeah,
and one character has to leave the room with the rose by the end of the story, and you tell me, I'm not telling you how that happens, I'm just
right.
telling you that
That's
that one
cool.
action has to happen, and then I think it is actually, and I used to say this a lot more than I do, but I still think it's true. One of the things I love about horror, about so-called genre fiction in general, is I love the conventions. I love the kind of the architecture that says, oh, in a vampire story, here are the rules, and then that becomes a kind of a challenge, in the whatever, the same way you say, oh, here's a 12 bar blues, and we have to do certain things for it to be a 12 bar blues. Oh, okay, how can within that, like, maybe I want to tweak it, or maybe I just want to see what I can do within that structure. And so, yeah, maybe I want my vampire can only come out during the day. I mean, when I was writing The Wide Carnivorous Sky, that was part of the inspiration for that, was just, what if you had a vampire or a vampiric thing that could only come out at day? What then? And a lot of things followed from there. So I think that those, what can seem like almost mindless technical requirements. Well, each line has to be 120 syllables long, or
Right.
whatever. No, well, that's just the way it is, and
Yeah.
then you sort of see how that affects what you're doing.
Um, when I did Apex Predator, which has a song that quotes your book in it, um, Peter wrote a short story for a song I did called Contracting Iris. And, because I told him, I was like, look, this is either about a disease called Iris or a girl named Iris or both and how they
Both,
interact.
right.
And I sent him the lyrics and I was like, well, this is kind of my thinking on it. And he sat on it for about 3 weeks and he said, I had to figure out how the disease would actually work.
Hmm.
I thought that was like, I love that because it's just like, he was like, I want them to get infected by rain. So I had to figure out how to make it kind of all function.
Right,
And so I think that when you are working with those archetypes, that's part of the challenge is kind of going, okay, well, these are the rules, right? And again, going back to Peter, he wrote a whole big, he did an entire lecture on how fictionally we bring vampires back, and this is biologically how they.
right.
I've always been fascinated by this idea of vampires or any supernatural creature that's like got ridiculous longevity or whatever. And but they're aware, they're self-aware, they're not just some monstrous killing machines. Like, okay, so now you've got a problem. You've got to do this, and that's cool and all, but you also have to survive and live within a society. And
Right,
there's a great Key and Peele sketch about this guy who joins this vampire group, and he's like, I don't want to be spooky. I just want to see future cars. You know, and so
right.
that's I always try and think about that kind of archetype of like, okay, yes, we've gotten over the fact that I'm spooky and I need blood to live, but also I just want to sit and watch sports or whatever the guy does. It's like we're moving all of those elements from that. Like I always getting that idea with the elder gods and Cthulhu and stuff. It's like, okay, well, you're just stuck there at the bottom of the ocean for millennia.
Right.
What are you doing?
Yeah, I
So
wrote a story which was in my anthology Children or my collection Children of the Fang. And the conceit of that is that the elder gods are quite happy. Like they don't like Cthulhu because Cthulhu wants to make all this change. And they're like, dude, the humans are already poisoning the planet. It's fine. They've done a much better job at wrecking this place than we ever could have. Like just leave it alone.
mhm.
And so they're hiring people in essence to try to defeat or to circumvent Cthulhu, I guess, because they're like, this is too much trouble. Stop it. And they call Cthulhu the fanatic because he's like, no, must rise from the depths. And they're like, stop.
Like,
So I
worshiping me right now, and I'm not getting rid of that. So
right.
I gotta
It's
do my thing.
I do wonder though, like the figure of the immortal wanderer, which goes back to the Wandering Jew, and there's a huge, as Eugene Sue writes a huge novel called The Wandering Jew, which I have a copy of somewhere. I haven't read it, but it draws on that, or, that story, and then you get Maturin's Melmoth the Wanderer in the early 1800s, and at first that figure is seen as a like a sort of damned figure, damned to continue, and the vampire at first, I think, is seen in a similar way, right? That they're these damned creatures because they can't die. But I think for us, especially as a sort of belief in an afterlife really continues to wane, the idea of a kind of physical, at least longevity, if not
Mhm.
immortality, comes to seem really attractive. Oh, you'd finally have time to read all those books you want to read. And yeah, you have to snack on someone, but okay, you can deal with that. You'll work that out.
I just wrote my first genuine rock concept album, and it's actually called The Last Immortal. And it's like
Hmm.
a character in the 1800s who just he runs away from the slaver ship and to Marrakesh, gets married, and then he has to watch his wife die because he doesn't know he's in.
Yeah.
And so she just turns and blames him for it, and he's just like, okay, I'm never doing that again. So he just turns into a piece of shit. He's just drunk for the next 200 years playing cards, and that's pretty much it. Because I just love this idea of a mortal character living through these historical events and not giving a shit about any of them, not even knowing that it's happening.
Right.
So yeah, like it's just such an interesting idea of like the when we keep talking about how appealing the monsters start to become, it makes me think of Nightbreed
Hmm.
with the whole like when you dream of flying. You dream of living forever. This is just what we do.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I think, I mean, Nightbreed. It's funny. I did a movie podcast and we talked about Nightbreed / Cabal, and the Nightbreed director's cut and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, it's the Barker's short novel, I think, works better than the film does, although the film has a certain kind of cheesy grandeur. There are things that you're like, wait, they have all these redneck gun-toting people in Canada, and you're like, wait a minute. And maybe they do.
Actually, a pretty,
but
yeah. Apparently Canada's
but
a very high redneck population. No kidding. Like
no.
I've talked to people about it.
But I think that and that actually takes us back to Lovecraft too, to The Shadow over Innsmouth, right? Is that, one of the transformations in our understanding, I think, of how horror works, what the horror genre does, and so on, has been in that identification with the monster and the willingness to see the monster as, it's this unique, often persecuted individual, and it's being persecuted by the mob in
Right.
essence, the armed mob that's coming for it. And I guess in both, and if you think about James Whale's Frankenstein,
Mhm.
and if you think about the original King Kong, there's something of that there, right? They hear these big creatures, and especially Frankenstein's monster is ultimately kind of sympathetic. King Kong is, but King Kong is always a little bit scary too, because King Kong might eat you,
Mhm. Yeah,
but ultimately they're both pursued by and persecuted by the mob, and then killed by the mob.
Yeah, that's one of those things that as far as my own personal like triggers for horror that fucks me up is like I'm a reasonably intelligent guy. I can be well spoken, and so I tend to think that if I were to go into a situation where things were really dire, I could be like, look, I'm absolutely convinced that you can stop pretty much any sort of altercation by just going time out because that is
Right.
wired into us from when we were kids. But watching movies like Midsummer fucks with me because you can't rationalize with those guys. They're still going to like turn you into some bloody sculpture thing.
Right.
That's the kind of thing that at my core really is just like, man, there's just no way out of that.
Well, it's the Wicker Man too, right? It's like we have a cultic need, we have this religious need, and it says we need a human sacrifice, and you're it, buddy.
Yeah.
So get in the Wicker Man.
Right.
And I think that how would I put it? I'm thinking about the last few years, right? And the response to COVID, which was, I don't believe any of that, and I'm still waiting. Okay, so speaking of like inspiration or things to write, I'm still waiting for the zombie story about all the people who don't believe the zombie uprising and are going out and getting bitten and torn apart and all this sort of stuff, and then insisting it's still a liberal conspiracy. And so I think so in that regard, like the Midsommar or Wicker Man kind of situation where it's like, no, that's just a small cult. That's most people are rational.
Yeah.
I worry it's the opposite. I worry that in fact, no, that's pretty much everybody, and the rational ones are actually far fewer than we wish they were.
That was something that I've been really working on coming to terms with because you think about like, okay, so you have like this. You've got your median, your bell curve, and let's say, okay, so the lower 50% of them are just going to dumb, so that's going to make them susceptible, and even intelligent people can be, but also just more likely to be susceptible. But then you also have really intelligent people with mental illnesses.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, who haven't dealt with it. So that's cutting even another section of that bell curve off. And you start to kind of realize it's like the people that are intelligent and have actually put effort into getting medicated and dealing with their problems, they do start to seem like they're in the minority,
Well, it's not to get, what the hell, to get overly political. I can remember in 2000 and then in 2004 watching the vice presidential debates and watching Dick Cheney debating with Joe Lieberman, and then oh, who was it? John, the guy who was disgraced himself. Anyway, whoever carries it's I'm blanking on it right now, but John Edwards, I think it was
Yeah.
John Edwards. Anyway, and what I can remember was, Cheney was so well spoken and thoughtful and precise, and I was honestly, and maybe I should be ashamed to admit this, but I was like, but he's smart. Like, how can he be evil? Or
Right.
and that, when I look at when I look at Donald Trump and I think, oh, Trump's evil, but he's an idiot. So I'm like, well, that makes sense. That tracks. But looking at someone like Cheney and thinking, here's someone who is smart enough to know better,
Right.
but is saying, nope, I don't, I may know better, but I don't want to do that. There's a man, one of the it's funny to leap from that to back to comics, but there's one panel from one of the recent Spider-Man, I think it might have been Ultimate Spider-Man, where he's dealing with is it Sauron or one of the like living dinosaur type things, and he says, you have this amazing technology, and with this you could cure cancer, and instead you're turning people into dinosaurs. And Sauron says, I don't want to cure cancer, I want to turn people into dinosaurs.
Right.
And I feel like that's like that is so, that's on target, right? That we, when I was a kid, I can remember watching Cosmos, the first iteration, Carl Sagan. And one of the later episodes, he talks about galactic civilizations, and he says, oh, Star Wars would never happen, because if we're advanced enough to go to space, when we meet other people, we would be peaceful and join together and so on. And now I'm like, no, I'm afraid, I'm afraid I don't agree with that, Carl. Not necessarily anyway.
In my ongoing effort to try and make sense of a lot of this, like, I'm never going to agree with it, but it's always trying to understand, because I've seen people that I think are really good people become incredibly hateful and scared. And I was thinking a lot about that hate and how hate is just misplaced fear.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to be that scared of something that has absolutely nothing to do with you, then is this existential fear that you can't, somehow that threatens your sense of self. And that's where like the core thing is. And that just blows me away, I think, because I don't know, like, maybe it was just how I was raised or something, but for me, it's my life has always just been kind of like, well, people can like me or not. I don't really care, because I know who I am and I know what I do and I know why I exist. But so it's always remarkable to me to see that level of fear in people about things that just have nothing to do with them.
Well, I think fear, excuse me, fear is a powerful motivator, or a powerful tool, therefore, to
Yes,
be
absolutely.
exploited. I think, I mean, I feel like what we've seen over the course of my lifetime is this a growing kind of like politics of resentment,
Hmm.
where it's like, well, why should I have to do this? Why should I have to take whatever it is you want?
Right, right.
And I think that goes along with a kind of a maybe a bad faith, maybe in the kind of existential sense, like why should I have to do well in school? Well, because you want to get a job, and well, I didn't do well in school, but why should I have to? And I'm in this crappy job, and why should I have to work this crappy job? So it's like there are a series of actions that I feel at least a vocal, maybe, I don't know how large it is, but a vocal amount of our society, of the electorate, whatever, they don't want to take responsibility for the consequences of their actions. And so why can't I just say whatever I want? Well, you can, but then there will be consequences.
Yeah.
Why should there have to be consequences? So it's there was something I read or listened to the last few months where the sort of analyst was talking about the way that in America, freedom tends to represent freedom from. that we have a freedom from, and that can be used in really pernicious ways. I should be free not to have to bake you the wedding cake for your gay wedding, right? You're oppressing me if you're making me do that.
Right.
And as opposed to freedom as a positive participatory thing, you were free to vote in a free and fair election. That there are a lot of countries in the world where that is not the case. So exercise that freedom. And for, if I don't guard your freedom and you don't guard my freedom, then what's to stop that freedom from being taken away? And I think that being a grown-up is hard. It's hard work. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that no one wants to be a grown-up. There's that little meme where it says, so sometimes someone will say, is there a grown-up? And I'll look around and then I'll realize I'm the grown-up. And I'll be like, no, I'm looking for someone who's more grown-up than I am, But if you want to be an adult, it means that you have to make what may seem to you like hard choices. You may have to respect people who frighten you in some way because you're like, that's not something however they behave is not a way that I would behave, but that's okay. It doesn't take anything away from you. I think that there's this, I do feel that there's this way in which, Fox News in particular, right? But that whole sort of right-leaning media conglomerate has convinced people that they are having things taken away from them and that they're being victimized. And rather than as I see it, people are just being asked to behave like adults.
Right.
And that means there were things. I'm not a big fan of rom-coms. That's not really my cup of tea. I don't watch them. I don't hate them. I don't say that no one else can watch them. I may watch one if somebody says it's really good. It's not my cup of tea. That's fine. That doesn't, and I should not do anything to try to prevent anyone else from enjoying them.
It is not damaging anything, the fact that rom-coms exist.
Yeah.
I got into it with somebody once and he was like, trans people, they want more rights than me. And I didn't say it, but I was like, you're a middle-aged white dude.
Right.
Like, what possible rights do you not have that they could?
Right.
Like,
they want, I think, all anybody wants is equality.
Right.
And that, it's been observed that, people who panic about equality may be aware that they have not been just equal, but they've been a little bit ahead of things there, But I teach history, high school history, and the past couple of weeks we've been reached the point where we're talking about the Declaration of Independence, and we have been parsing out that thing. And, it's right there in the beginning. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. And you can talk about the contradictions of, but Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. And yes, absolutely. But, that is something that as a society, we say we believe that we're all created equal, that we all have the rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and the right to overthrow the government, which is something that doesn't get, if it doesn't respect those rights. Right. But, I think to myself increasingly, how can you have life without health? So when we complain about healthcare, I'm like, if you don't have healthcare, you can't have life.
Right.
Maybe once upon a time it was not as practical, maybe in Jefferson's day, but these days it's practical to give everybody health. You can't have liberty if you can't be who you are. And as long as who you are is not harming anybody else, you can't be a serial killer. That's, we draw the line at places, but that's, and again, the pursuit of happiness. So what's funny is the way that the kind of way that desire to be free, not to have to do anything, somehow turns into then being free to do something bad, to take other people's freedom away from them. It corkscrews in this really malevolent kind of way.
Yeah, and it's seen as a zero-sum game. Like if you are more free, somehow that takes away what I've
Right.
already done. It's like, no, gay people being able to get married does not make your marriage less special. You
Well, I
know,
think there's also the I mean, I think of a few things that way, right? I think that on the one hand, you got to wonder how many people are curious. And when they see gay people getting married, they feel deeply nervous for reasons they don't want to think about.
of
And that
course.
may be a little bit unfair, but I think about that.
No, I mean, you're not going to have that sense of existential dread unless you feel existentially threatened. And if
Yeah.
you're, your sense of self. So if you are seeing something that maybe is something you are feel conflicted about because it's something you wish you could do, then yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's
Well, it's the thing what was on going around online that said so many Republican congressmen have turned out to be gay that I'm worried I might secretly be a spider. It's or the snake, I guess. But so yeah, I think that's part of it is there's a certain amount of it that is interest in those things and a fear of that interest because it doesn't conform to certain sort of cultural stereotypes you might have about yourself and how you can be defined as a man or as a woman, as a cis het.
right, right.
I think what goes along with that too is that the people who want to deny other people those rights, that the county clerk in was it Kentucky? I can't remember, who refused to
Yeah,
give
yeah.
the wedding license, like and people who dug into her social media and that said, oh, but she's been divorced and she's this and she's that, she's been a bad person. But the thing is that another friend of mine who was part of the kind of, brought up as part of like the more evangelical tradition said, like there's very much this tradition of people redeeming themselves, of repenting, and who makes a more effective or more powerful example of redemption than someone who was, oh, they were a terrible sinner, but then when the moment of truth came and they had to give that marriage license, they made the right choice and they wouldn't do it. And so I think that there are, like, at the moment where we're trying to have these conversations about let's say each other, even that we don't really understand each other necessarily.
Mhm.
So I think that I'm sure that there's some whatever mirror universe version of this podcast where they're like,
Oh,
those damn
Joe Rogan's
those
off, doing his own thing.
yeah those damn liberals, why can't they understand X, Y, or Z, right? And they don't. So they are not willing to sort of enter into the sort of conceptual space to try to figure out why are we coming from where we're coming from, and then is there a way for us potentially to bridge that gap, and I'm not 100% sure there is. I mean, I hope there is,
Yeah,
but I think that at the moment, the what's most distressing to me, I think, about the current political moment is the cruelty, is
mhm.
the delight in cruelty.
Right.
Um, uh, I'm trying to think who maybe it was Richard Rorty, some years ago, wrote a book. A couple of the chapters actually had to deal with literature and the function of literature within his kind of sort of pragmatist his ethos, and he argued that the purpose of literature was to help us not to be cruel, that it increased our empathy and so on. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know that I agree with him that that's the purpose, but for him, cruelty is
Like function.
like, that's like the worst thing that you can do. Like it's one thing to be mindlessly violent. That's bad. That's absolutely bad. But animals can be mindlessly violent, right? But we are capable of cruelty to one another in a
Right.
way that no other animal is. And when we indulge in that, that's really bad. That's horror.
Yeah.
That's when you think about like who would be so many villains or monsters or whatever in horror are not cruel. They're frightening. They're on the rampage.
Like
You
Godzilla
know,
was just doing a thing. He just,
yeah. I mean, you have to, like, on the one hand, you can't let Godzilla stomp over Tokyo, so you
right,
have to do something.
right.
But there's no need to be self-righteous about it, right? And same thing with most of the great monsters. There's no need to be self-righteous, you know. Um, but the worst villains are cruel. They are cruel, and they're self-righteous, I think.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Um, I when COVID hit, well, after COVID hit, and the we were starting to come out of it. There was a vaccine, and I was like, okay, I can get back to touring. That's cool. It was kind of nice having a break because I didn't have to think about that, so I got to do all of this other stuff.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
but then I was like, okay, I'm ready. I've got new material. Go out, do the thing. And since I was a kid, we're about the same age, and I was raised with this idea of this pride in America, not from a patriotic standpoint, but you were always told like, oh, we're number one in science and we're number one in this and that.
right.
And and then I guess there's just kind of my innate sense of how I think people should try and progress. You want to become a better person, you want to become smarter, you want to, be more exposed, et cetera, et cetera. And so when there was a vaccine, I was like, okay, cool, everybody's going to pull together and we're all going to do the right thing. And now, of course, I have read about the corrupted blood thing on World of Warcraft, where the CDC was able to watch that and kind of go, oh, look, well, those people over there are intentionally infecting people, and those people over there, yeah, they're self-quarantining, and that's cool. But, so when all the conspiracy theories and all that other stuff dropped, it was so disheartening for me. It was
Yeah,
just kind of like, and that was, I guess, an existential dread because I think you have this idea that yes, you're going to die and all that, but human race will continue and they will go on and do these really cool science fiction-y things.
right.
And it's cool that we were able to be part of that, at least for a small point, but now we're going off to the stars and. And then when you start to like really look around and kind of go, oh, maybe that's not going to happen. Maybe this is the great filter. Maybe dumb is the great filter, and it's all going to get destroyed because of just ignorance and fear,
Yeah.
all of these stupid reasons that can be overcome.
Well, I think I absolutely, and I think that what was frustrating was going as far back as the George W. Bush administration. We knew that we knew for a long time that climate change was happening.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And, Bush sold this notion, his administration sold this notion that, well, not all scientists agree. And it's like, 99 scientists agree, but there's one guy who's like, oh, maybe not. Oh, we're going to listen to that guy, And that, I think ultimately, right, that was an economic thing. That was, there's still a lot of money to be made
right.
in
Yeah,
fossil fuels. And the same thing I think happened with the COVID vaccine was that you had these things like Fox News
mm-hmm.
that were making a lot of money in advertising dollars because and if they could whatever, get on there and say, no, this is all a conspiracy by the federal government, then people were watching that and their ad revenue went up. Mm-hmm. And so it was, it was about money fundamentally, and that's it's one thing to be like stupid. It's one thing to have limits to your intelligence and you just can't understand something, and because you can't understand it, you're too afraid, you're not going to do it. I mean, that's bad, but it's understandable. But somebody who knows, the vaccine is probably safe, but I'm going to make what money I can. Yeah, we're going through climate change, but I need to make some money. Like there is a special place in hell for those people, and I think that I think that there is an almost sort of sociopathic kind of ethos at work that's like, well, I'm not going to get hurt, or well, so what if somebody believes this dumb stuff I'm saying?
Mm.
Yeah, it's really the badness, I guess, is a fundamental badness, a fundamental evil, really, of that is horrifying. And I don't know. It's funny. The older I get, the more I feel. I sound like whatever I should be on the barricades with Karl Marx or something. But I don't know if capitalism is the great filter. I don't know if capitalism at its worst is in fact the great filter. That's the thing that has held us back from where we should be. At this point, like we're halfway through the 2020s. 19 whatever, go back to the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I can remember just the sense of relief I felt at that. And I can remember the sense of relief I felt when the Soviet Union was just, nope, there was going to be some chaos and there was some turbulence, but go back then and 1991 and say to me, hey, 2025, where do you think we'll be? I would be like, Mars. We'll definitely be at Mars by then, and so on, space stations and all this kind of stuff. And where are we? We have NASA as trying to explain to people, no, that the Earth is really round. Trust me, we've checked this one out. That's where we're not lying to you. That is astonishing. It's astonishing to think that at this very moment in time, you have a U.S. government that wants to shut down cancer research. Which is to really say they want to privatize it. Again, it's about money. So those things they stagger my imagination. That is, it is disappointing, to put it mildly, to think that there are people who are that venal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got friends who work at NASA, and I've done stuff for now. I wrote music for NASA, but I've got friends who work there, and I was kind of getting some stuff in real time that was happening, like that wasn't getting out into the world at one point. Like, yes, we are removing all references to climate change off of our websites. We're doing it proactively because we know NOAA is about to go down.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that that is actively harmful.
Right.
That's the thing, right? It's
this is going to kill people.
Yeah. The trying to get rid of NOAA. It's I honestly, again, I can't decide. Part of me thinks, well, it's because they're trying to privatize this stuff so that you'll just have to pay for everything. And like when. So my younger son is the big fisherman of the family. I'm really not much of a fisherman at all. He's where I get all my fishing references from. So, and my wife is from Scotland. Mm-hmm. So they've gone to Scotland a number of times together. I stay home and watch the dogs. And he'll go fishing in Scotland. When you go fishing in Scotland, most places you have to pay for it. You have to, it's not always a huge amount of money, but it's not free.
Right.
Whereas here, he gets his fishing license at the beginning of every year. He goes up to the Catskills. There's public water that's available. He can fish wherever he wants. We're not hunters, but I have friends who are hunters, and it's the same kind of thing. They're public hunting grounds where you can go. So, like, privatizing sounds like, oh, that's great. Everybody should have to pay for everything. But the thing about that is that it hurts people who don't have as much more than it does hurt, Elon Musk or whoever. So I think that the public good that something like NOAA has provided, or that NASA provides, right? The CDC, how do you put a number value on that? These guys would like to, but
the role of the government is to make sure everybody in their country is able to have health, happiness, liberty. And so those are functions of that. Like it's kind of like people pitching like, oh, the post office doesn't make money. It's not supposed to make money. It's a service.
Yes, it's you can't run the thing with the post office, right? And it's in the Constitution because the free flow of information was so important to the founders that they included that in there. The thing with the post office is I go into the post office, I say I need to send this package to some rural, some fan in the wilds of Montana,
Mhm.
and the post office says, "Okay, we'll get it there." And I go to UPS or FedEx or whoever. They don't have to do that. They could say, "Nah, sorry, that's not in our service area."
Right.
So, so we never ask, right? Should the military make a profit? Why don't we have a more profitable military?
Right, yeah.
So the notion that we're going to run public goods like healthcare, or the military, or the police, or health, or education, anything. The notion that we need to run those things like businesses is deeply, deeply flawed.
Mm-hmm.
So much of the damage that's been done to the country over the past maybe 30 odd years has come from that, applying that business model to everything. If it's funny. I mean, if you were to say to a businessman or businesswoman, "Oh, I think that we should run your business the way, like, it's a public good," they would lose their minds. They'd like, "What about value for stockholders and all this sort of stuff?" Not everything is the same as everything else, and I think that those are, that is something that people seem to find very difficult to wrap their mind around. That you say, if I ran a business the way the post office is run, they're not the same thing. It's like saying if I ran my doctor's office the same way a lawn service is run, they're not the same thing. Stop comparing them.
We got to watch that in real time. At one point, Donna and I ended up in a business. We owned a $500,000 art gallery. We were partial owners of a $500,000 art gallery in Baltimore. It was absolutely beautiful, and we didn't intend for this to happen, but through this really weird series of circumstances, we ended up having a partner who had owned a local oil business. And he was like, "No, it's fine. All business is the same. I know how to run this, so I can."
Right.
And we were both sitting there like,
maybe not.
"This is too good an opportunity for us not to do." And we made sure in the contracts, it's like we were not financially, on the hook for any of this. But and so we saw exactly how it was going to play out, and it allowed us to do certain things we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, which was great. But we watched that whole notion of, yes, well, I can, without knowing anything about this, then it's like, no, it just doesn't work that way, even a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's just remarkable to me. It's terrifying, the idea of, like, we are already on the low end of insurance, and with our medications and mental illness.
Yeah.
And so it's terrifying to me to like, like, if that gets blown up somehow, that's it. That's the end of us. Like, anything we've ever made, all of it, not happening anymore. But also, you look at that on a larger scale, it's like, we're pretty fucked up, but we're not nearly as fucked up as a lot of people can be who desperately need those meds.
Yeah.
Like, the idea of that happening on a mass level, like I tried to wean myself off of one of my medications a couple of years ago, and I had panic attacks constantly for 3 months. And you put that on the entire world or your entire country, going off antipsychotics and all this other stuff. And that to me is pretty terrifying. And somebody Donna talks to, her therapist, is pretty convinced that that's not likely to happen, what they're going after specifically for other things. But that's kind of one of those things. It's just,
well, I think in a way, like, this is the time to be overreacting. This is the time. I think that I think that aside from, I mean, there's all the stuff that we just saw today or yesterday with Trump saying, yeah, they rigged the election for him.
I have been not paying attention if I can avoid it. Did that happen? Like,
Well, yeah, he said, oh yeah, they said, well, I should be president again, so they rigged the election. Now, he'll say he didn't mean it, or it was a joke, or whatever, and maybe he misspoke. I don't know. But I think
that is that Elon told Musk that Elon told Trump when he won that he rigged the election.
That would make sense, right? Just to increase his own status.
If he had lost, he'd been like, well, we did what we could. And if he wins, it's like, yes, I won.
Right.
A special guy.
Yeah, no, that is probably true. I
Like I've
think.
got a friend who actually does US election security, and so it's like I know the people that were actually involved with a bunch of that shit, and like it's really hard to do.
Yeah,
So
yeah, but I think that like at the moment, obviously they're trying to see what they can get away with, and
mhm.
I think that uh, Representative Al Green standing up at the State of the Union the other week and saying no, everybody should have been doing that, and
Yes.
I think this. I think, to be frank, that color coordinated outfits or little paddles with little notes on them um, don't do anything.
Yeah,
I think, and I realize there are people who would say, "Oh, but that's not nice." But
we've
you know,
we have played it fair, and look where we're at.
I think that the nice can be the enemy of the good. I
Mhm.
think that the concern for decorum and appearances and so on can really be the enemy of the good. And I think at this moment you have this kind of digital fascist. And I don't think that there's any, John Stewart, for example, criticized people for using the F word. But I think that if you look at the historical fascism, not just Hitler, but Mussolini and so on, strong authoritarian leader, cult of personality, will leave business alone as long as business does what they want.
Mhm.
Trying to control the culture, Kennedy Center. I mean, it fits if the shoe fits,
Yeah,
and
no, absolutely.
yeah, and so I and also the claim that, but he's the president. What he's doing is legal, as
Ooh,
we've said so often. Like legality is not the test of morality. Slavery was legal.
right.
So I think that you have to acknowledge that we're at the beginning of something, and what is so worrisome, right, is the precedent that this is setting, not just for what Trump will do,
Mhm.
but Trump is not a healthy man. I mean, physically,
I know
I
he'll be
don't think
gone.
he was 78 years old. Nobody thinks that, So when Trump has a stroke or he dies or whatever, and Vance takes over,
Mhm.
you are telling Vance this is what it's okay to do. Now, Vance is a much less dynamic and charismatic
I actually,
figure than
I have a
Trump
hope,
is.
and it's maybe it's just my get out of mental jail free card. But my hope is
Yeah,
that once Trump is gone, because that cult of personality, it's so fucking specific, is that it will ignite the thing that all of these fascist groups, the people that think in this way, always end up doing, which is just slicing everything out. I need to have an enemy, therefore I'm going to make you into it, even if you're within my own group. Like
right, right.
they get to start strong because they're all like, hey, yeah, so you're a Nazi? Okay, cool. Well, we agree on some of this stuff, so we're cool being on the same side. But then when you're actually in power, in order to maintain that sense of self and the sense of self power, because they're all really insecure underneath all of that shit, they have to like keep cutting the sides of that bell curve off.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
It's still there.
No, fingers crossed. I mean, I hope nobody that is currently in Trump's orbit has The Apprentice, and The Apprentice did so much for him that it's not even funny. That
Mhm.
they don't have The Art of the Deal, and so Trump had a set of circumstances or whatever that made him seem to be this genius and blah blah blah. Nobody else, nobody else has that, and so I would agree that when
I think they're going to look at Vance and start seeing, well, he's not as cool, and and start maybe like
yeah, well, I
finding
think
the
Vance
finding
is
reasons.
just he is not a he's not a likable guy.
No, he really.
Trump isn't either, but Trump has this certain kind of bluff charisma that some people respond to. I don't think that I don't think that Vance has
No,
that.
no, no.
Um,
He looks like he doesn't know what he is doing. He sounds like he doesn't know what he's doing, and he always strikes me as, even when they're together, like the thing with from the Ukraine.
Zelensky, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, that's right. Get him, Butch. Get him.
Right, exactly, exactly. There's, so but I think, and this is a funny thing. I don't think that at the moment, it seems clear that that Trump circle and Trump supporters hope that he will be reelected in 28, that it'll just be Trump, Trump forever. And then if he doesn't run in 28, Don Jr. apparently is saying, I'm going to run. So they just imagined, a dynasty going on. But what they, I think, don't realize is that probably won't happen. Mm-hmm. And that the abuses that Trump is committing right now, as long as they are tolerated, as they are legalized, anybody can do that now. Mm-hmm. And so when the Democrats get back in and they want to make everybody get gay married, look out, buddy, that's going to happen. It's there was a wonderful skit, and I wish I could remember what show it was on. This guy goes to visit his friends, and they're like, well, the Democrats were going to make us all get gay married anyway, so I got married to Ernie, and we adopted this little kid, and and it's just like, wait, what? But I think that the restraint of that kind of executive authoritarian power, that being restrained, benefits all of us. Mm-hmm. And I think that the people who went along with Trump because they said, oh, he's going to put the Supreme Court justices in to overturn Roe v. Wade and all this sort of stuff, all they did was kill a bunch of women. Right. That's, if you look at what's happened because of all the chaos surrounded by that, mm-hmm. to my mind, all those people who were like, well, I may not agree with Trump, but at least he overturned Roe v. Wade. Right. Good, then you can own all of those dead women too. You can own all of those women who suffered horrible, horrible deaths because of that. Right. Because we have certainly not seen an uptick in efforts at adoption and at alternatives to abortion. We have not seen any kind of uptick there. We've not seen
that with people before. They're like, "Oh, I'm pro this." I'm like, "Great. So how many people have you adopted? What have you?"
Right. What's your or at least
now? What have you done to make things better?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, put your money where your mouth is. Right. Somebody who could say they did that, I wouldn't agree with them, but I would say, well, fair enough.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that I think that people who voted for Trump, they own this. They own all of this stuff, and they own the horrors that have come and the horrors that I hope are not to come, but that I fear are.
Yeah. Real quick, and my battery's getting ready to go, so I will let you off the hook. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
No, I'm sorry. This is like the horror conversation. I mean, in a sense, it is, right?
No, it's a real world horror. And look, the entire point of all of this is passion. This is passion. This is something we're very passionate about. Clearly.
Yeah.
And also just to the last thing I've done a lot of interviews with people, and it's like, what are your influences and this and that and everything? It's like, no, let's talk about something I actually care about and showing off who we are as people, and right. I think it's an incredibly important thing just for as an entity when you're extended to all these other things. One thing I was just thinking about though is this guy that we were partnered with, he was a fan of Trump, and he also did something that Trump has been doing. I think it's been very interesting is he would always, whenever we needed to have somebody do some work, he was always looking for the deal. Like, I got a friend who does this, I got a friend who does that, we're gonna get
right
that much or whatever. And every single time they may have known how to do it right, they never did. And so it ended up with, it's like, oh, well, they did this, and now we're going to go pay somebody the actual money.
Right. Now right.
Which we could have just done the first time. But you have to, so much of that like sense of self is again being the business guy. It's like, to the point that like I would rather hire somebody who does a shitty job but makes me feel validated than actually do the right thing.
It's that sense, isn't it, of being an insider, right? Mm-hmm. Of being as opposed and therefore, as having some control, as opposed to being, I mean, imagine you're like, I need to have like some kind of intensive surgery. I know a guy, right. No, I don't. I want to know who the best person is for that.
Yeah,
job.
Exactly.
And I think that does, at the very least, it goes back to George W. Bush and people who elected him saying, I want a guy I feel like I can have a beer with. And I'm like, I don't. I want a guy who knows his job, right. who knows how to do the job,
Yep. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much. When
No,
when
thank you, folks.
oh, sorry, that did kind of seem kind of abrupt. I didn't mean it to be that abrupt.
No, not at all. Not at all. That's totally fine. I'm glad to have
Um,
the chance to vent about this. And I'm sure they'll show
no,
this at my trial before I'm assigned to whatever re-education camp I'm going to.
yeah, yeah. Well, here we are, guys. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Uh,
Hey, Elon.
yeah. Um, but so when I'm waiting until I get like 25 of these, and then I'll put them all out at once. And then I'll drop you a line before that, and anything that's happening in that time frame, to let us know. But where can people find you? And
Oh,
um,
I did withdraw. I shuttered my account on Twitter
mhm.
after the Nazi salute. I probably should have shuttered it a long time ago. I didn't want to delete it because I don't want anyone taking my name, so in theory it's still like
Right,
there,
right.
but just nobody. So and for the moment I'm on Facebook and Threads, although Zuckerberg is just as, maybe not just as bad as Elon, but he's up there. It's a race.
There's
Um,
potential there, yeah.
Blue Sky. I have my own blog, John Paul Langan, WordPress.com. It is infrequently updated. Instagram, I'm there as well. It's the thing about social media, you can't avoid it, right? But it's all so tangled up with all this bad stuff. But yeah, you can find me at any one of those spots. I'm reasonably visible in that regard.
And responsive. Like, I mean, I just wrote him out of the blue, and that's one of the cool things about all of this is like the guy who did the audiobook for the narration for the audiobook for Masque Red Death for me. I had no idea he was like this multiple Grammy winner dude. I was just
Yeah, yeah,
to a Shirley Jackson audiobook, and I was like, that's the voice, that's the guy I need. So I just found him on
yeah.
Twitter, wrote him, and it was just like, hey, you want to do this? And I love that. That's one of the things I really do appreciate about living in the future is being able to write to people that actually affect your life and sometimes be able to work with them, which is
Yeah,
just
I hear you. I think most people are actually, unless, I mean, I think there are a few people who are like celebrities, and I think that brings its own, Stephen King, that
right,
brings
right.
its own problems for them. But I think most other people, we're just hanging out. You can
Yeah.
send us a line if drop us a line. If we don't respond, it's not because we hate you. It's probably just because we had a rough day at work and we got some stuff to do.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it really matters too. Like, because you make the thing and you throw it out in the void and, you know, nobody or very rarely somebody will get up, in the New York Times or whatever. But for the most part, it's just a bunch of people who make the thing and float it and see what happens. So, taking the
Yeah.
time to actually write those people really, it always means the world when it's just like, oh, hey, this thing that sold 100 copies actually mattered to somebody. So that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So excellent. Well, thank you very much. And
Thank you for having me.
absolutely.